My family thinks I'm a cold-hearted corporate monster who ruined our lives over a few $1 million, but they conveniently forget that they spent 10 years treating me like unpaid domestic help while they vacationed in the French Alps. My name is Elena Thorne. I am 30 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have been a junior partner at one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Manhattan. My life is measured in billable hours, quarterly projections, and the relentless pressure of closing multi-million-dollar deals. People look at my life from the outside, my corner office, my sleek apartment in the Upper West Side, my impeccable wardrobe, and they see success. They see a woman who has everything. But what they don't see is the quiet, persistent erosion of my personal life, a slow-motion car crash orchestrated by the people who are supposed to be my sanctuary, my family. It was December 17, 2024. I had just finished an 18-hour day, the final stretch of a grueling 3-month-long acquisition deal that was slated to close on December 20th. I was exhausted, my brain felt like it had been scrubbed with steel wool, but there was a profound, humming satisfaction in my chest. If this deal went through, and it was going to, I would be the youngest lawyer in the firm's history to be considered for a full partnership track by mid-2025. I walked out of the office into the crisp, biting New York City air, the streetlights reflecting off the sidewalk in sharp, cold shards of light. My phone buzzed in my bag, a persistent vibration that felt like an intrusion on my hard-won calm. I pulled it out, expecting a follow-up from the junior associates, or perhaps a quick check-in from my mentor. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. My chest tightened automatically. It wasn't that I didn't love my mother, it was that our relationship had become a series of demands masquerading as family obligations, always timed to coincide with the most critical moments of my professional life. "Elena," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of a greeting. "No, how are you? No, how is the deal coming along?" Just the sharp, businesslike sound of my name. "Hi, Mom," I said, leaning against the cold brick of the building, my breath visible in the air. "I'm just heading to the subway. It's been a crazy day. I'm not calling to chat about your schedule," she said, the lack of empathy hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "Your father, Derek, and I are heading to Europe tomorrow morning. We've been planning this for months. Paris, Switzerland, Rome, Barcelona, it's all booked, non-refundable. Your grandfather is staying at the Connecticut house, and he needs someone there. You're coming home to take care of him." I felt the blood drain from my face, a sudden sharp coldness spreading through my limbs. "Mom, what are you talking about? I have a massive deal closing in 3 days. I've been working on this acquisition since October. I've requested Christmas week off for months, and that's when I'm planning to visit, but I can't leave now. I'm the point person." "Elena, don't give me that," she snapped. "Arthur is 81 years old. He needs someone to manage his medications and ensure he's eating properly. You're the one who always talks about responsibility." "Well, this is your responsibility. We're leaving at 6:00 a.m. tomorrow. We'll be back on the 31st. Just ensure he gets to his appointment with Dr. Patel on the 23rd and make sure he keeps to his schedule. There's a list on the kitchen counter. Don't let me down." "Mom, wait." The line went dead. I stood there in the dark, the roar of the city around me suddenly muffled, as if I were underwater. I had sacrificed my weekends, my social life, and my mental bandwidth for this deal. I had missed weddings, birthdays, and holidays, always with the promise that the effort would pay off. And here was my mother, with 3 words, "Don't let me down," implying that my worth as a daughter was entirely dependent on my willingness to abandon my professional life to suit her vacation schedule. I walked home in a daze, my mind racing. The cabin in Vermont I had tried to book for a weekend getaway with my firm colleagues last year had been sacrificed for a last-minute family emergency that turned out to be nothing more than my mother needing someone to watch the house while they went to Turks and Caicos. I remembered the Thanksgiving I spent alone in Connecticut, eating leftovers while they posted photos from Grace Bay, my mother's reply to a follower's comment. "She's home taking care of Dad. Someone has to," still burned into my memory. That smiley face emoji she had used felt like a brand, a permanent mark of my status as the family's unpaid invisible help. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a small bag, my hands shaking with a mixture of suppressed rage and the hollow, familiar ache of being disregarded. I contacted my firm at 4 a.m., sending an email that felt like I was handing in my resignation, even though I was just asking for an emergency leave. I knew they would understand, but the weight of the disappointment I felt was crushing. I wasn't just losing a week of work, I was losing the momentum of a lifetime. I drove the 90 minutes to Connecticut in the dark. The house was exactly as I had left it when I moved out for law school. Pristine, silent, and suffocatingly familiar. I pulled my Audi into the driveway, the crunch of the gravel sounding like bones snapping in the quiet morning. My father's Mercedes, my mother's Lexus, and my brother Derek's Audi were all gone. The driveway was empty. They were already on their way to JFK. I let myself in with my old key. The house was cold, smelling of stale potpourri and expensive, unused furniture. A thin wisp of smoke was rising from the chimney in the living room. I walked in, expecting silence, but there, sitting in his mahogany rocking chair by the fireplace, was Grandpa Arthur. He was holding a book, his bifocals perched on the bridge of his nose, his posture straight as a rod. He didn't look up immediately. "Hello, Elena," he said, his voice as steady as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Hello, Grandpa," I replied, my voice cracking slightly. "They're really gone, aren't they?" "They left at 6 a.m., he said, finally closing his book. He looked at me, his blue eyes sharp and discerning, not the cloudy, fading gaze of an 81-year-old. "They left a note. It's on the kitchen counter, held up by that Eiffel Tower magnet they brought back from Paris in 2019. You remember that trip, don't you? The one you weren't invited on." I felt a sting of tears, but I blinked them back. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the yellow legal pad sheet taped to the refrigerator. It was a list of instructions, brief and cold. Medications in cabinet. Glucose meter in bathroom. Doctor appointment 2:30 p.m., December 23rd. Groceries should last 1 week. See you the 31st. No love, no thank you, no acknowledgement that I had a career that mattered. I folded the paper and shoved it into my jacket pocket. When I returned to the living room, Arthur was watching me with a look that wasn't sympathy but assessment. "Are you angry, Elena?" he asked. "I'm just tired, Grandpa," I said, sitting on the couch across from him. The fire was dying, the orange embers glowing like dying coals. "Tired is a mask for anger when you're forced to swallow it every day," he said, his tone devoid of judgment. He leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "I've watched you for years. I've seen you skip the hiking trip to Acadia when they decided Napa Valley was more important. I've seen you cancel your bridesmaid commitments for Sarah's wedding because Derek had a networking opportunity with the firm's partners. You always comply. You always think that if you're just good enough, just responsible enough, they'll finally see you." "I didn't think they'd change," I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "I just thought it was how we existed. I'm the lawyer. I'm the one who's supposed to be strong. I'm the one who holds it all together." "They don't deserve you," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, but it had a weight that silenced the room. "And on December 24th, you're going to open the envelope on the desk in my office. After that, you'll understand why." "What's in the envelope, Grandpa?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "You'll see," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "For now, go rest. Tomorrow, we have work to do." I went to my childhood bedroom, the room that still felt like a museum of a girl I no longer recognized. My desk had a plain white envelope on it, addressed in Arthur's shaky, elegant handwriting. "For Elena, open December 24th. I picked it up. It was thin, light, but it felt like a bomb. The next few days became a surreal blur. I fell into a routine, the precision of my professional life, bleeding into the domestic cage I had been forced into. I managed Nadin's medications, metformin, lisinopril, atorvastatin, checking his vitals with the obsessive detail I usually applied to contract clauses. Grandpa Arthur was not the fragile invalid my mother had painted him to be. He was alert, sharp, and possessed a quiet, mechanical genius. On the morning of the 19th, I found him with a screwdriver, dismantling the toaster, explaining with perfect logic why a loose contact spring didn't justify the expense of a new machine. "Why throw away something that still works?" he asked, not looking at me. "People today are so obsessed with the new that they forget the value of the foundation. They build things on sand and wonder why they collapse. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a coffee, watching him work. You know, the firm isn't like that, I said. Everything is about the next big thing. If you aren't growing, you're dying. Is that how you feel, Elena? He asked, twisting a screw with a steady hand. Are you growing, or are you just being worn down until you're small enough to fit into their lives? I didn't have an answer. I spent my afternoons reading files on my laptop, the Wi-Fi in the house painfully slow compared to my office network. I watched their Instagram stories through the digital window of their vacation. Paris. 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred dinners, private tours of Versailles. My mother, looking tanned and expensive in a new designer coat, smiling for the camera. Derek, my brother, drinking champagne on a Seine river cruise, his arm draped around my father's shoulders. The captions were a barrage of blessed and family goals. The sting wasn't the luxury. It was the absolute casual exclusion of my existence. Someone commented on my mother's post, "Where's Elena?" Her reply, posted within minutes, was, "She's home taking care of Dad. Someone has to." A smiley face emoji followed it, a digital slap. By December 22nd, I was vibrating with a new, sharper kind of energy. I had stopped crying. I had stopped trying to justify their behavior to myself. I was simply watching, an analyst assessing the damage. I had seen Arthur's door open slightly that morning, a rare lapse in his usual privacy, and saw a manila envelope on his desk from Wilson & Associates, a firm I recognized from the legal circuit in Stamford. Confidential, attorney-client privilege. Last will and testament, George Arthur Harrison. I didn't ask, I just kept track of the rhythm of the days. The appointment with Dr. Patel on the 23rd was a masterclass in normalcy. The doctor confirmed he was in better health than most people 30 years his junior. As I drove him home, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Is this Elena Thorne?" A smooth, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Jonathan Wilson. I'm your grandfather's attorney. He's asked me to schedule a meeting at his home on December 26th at 10 o'clock a.m. He'd like you to be present." "A meeting? Regarding what?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone, Ms. Thorne, but I can assure you it's a positive matter. Will you be available?" "Yes," I said, the word feeling like an anchor. "I'll be there." When I hung up, Arthur was staring out the window at the snow-covered Connecticut landscape. "He called?" he asked, without looking at me. "Yes," I said. "He wants me there on the 26th. "You're part of it, Elena," he said, turning to look at me. "Part of something that is long overdue." Christmas Eve morning, I woke at dawn, the house freezing and silent. I went to the desk, the white envelope waiting for me like a judge's verdict. I opened it with shaking hands. It wasn't a check, it was a letter, 2 pages of handwritten text, the ink dark and deliberate. "My dear Elena, if you're reading this, it's December 24th. I have watched you this week, just as I have watched you for the last 6 years. I have seen you put your life on hold for people who view your dedication as a weakness. I have seen you work until your hands bled while they spent your inheritance on 4-course meals and private tours. I didn't say anything before because I needed to be sure. I needed to see if you were doing this because you were trapped, or because you were simply too kind to fight back. Now I know. You aren't weak, Elena. You are just surrounded by people who have never been taught how to see you. I am not a poor man. You know this now, or you will know it soon enough. I have a significant estate, and your father, mother, and Derek have spent the last decade acting as if they are entitled to every cent of it. They aren't, and they won't get it. I am leaving the majority of my assets to you. Not because you are my granddaughter, but because you are the only person in this family who understands the value of something that cannot be bought. Integrity. On December 26th, Mr. Wilson will come to the house. He will explain everything. Your father will be furious. Your mother will weep. Derek will be horrified. But here is the truth, Elena. They do not need my money. They have never needed it. What they needed was to be held accountable for the way they have treated you. I am giving you the power to decide what happens next. You are no longer the servant. You are the arbiter. I love you, Elena. You have been the only thing in this family that made me proud to carry this name. Grandpa Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, the paper blurring as tears finally spilled over. Not from sadness, but from a strange, terrifying sense of liberation. I walked downstairs. Arthur was sitting in his chair, the same old flannel shirt, the same calm expression. "You read it," he said, his voice a statement, not a question. I nodded, the letter held tight in my hand. $20 million, Grandpa? Is that real? Give or take, depending on the market, he said, taking a sip of his coffee. I sold the rental properties in 2008 and invested the proceeds into index funds. It's grown significantly. But the money is the least important part of this, Elena. What matters is the structure. What structure? The structure of their behavior, he said. They are going to walk through that door on the 26th expecting to be the main characters of the story. They are going to be shocked to find that the script has been rewritten, and you are the one holding the pen. The next 36 hours felt like living in a vacuum. I spent Christmas Day with Arthur, a quiet, simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables by the fire. We didn't talk about the money. We talked about his time as a young man, about the rental properties in Hartford, about the loneliness of building something for people who never bothered to ask how it was built. For the first time, I saw him not as a grandfather, but as a man who had survived a lifetime of the same emotional neglect I had been suffering through. I checked my phone once. A flurry of messages from my mother. "Make sure the house is cleaned before we get back. Derek needs his room ready. Hope you haven't been too bored, sweetheart." I didn't respond, I didn't delete the messages. I just looked at them, the tone of casual, dismissive ownership hitting me like a cold wind. They were coming back tomorrow, expecting me to be the reliable, silent employee they had hired for free. They were coming back, expecting their comfortable, predictable world. On the morning of the 26th, the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. The cars pulled into the driveway at 11:15 a.m., my father's Mercedes, my mother's Lexus, and Derek's Audi. I watched from the upstairs window, my heart steady for the first time in years. They looked tired, irritable, still carrying the lingering arrogance of their European tour. They came in loud, complaining about the drive, the weather, the lack of coffee. I waited at the top of the stairs, my bag already packed, my laptop under my arm. "Elena?" My mother called out, her voice echoing in the foyer. "Where are you? We're starving. Did you make something?" I walked down the stairs, slowly, one step at a time. I saw them standing in the living room, my mother, elegant even in her travel-worn clothes, my father, checking his watch with an impatient frown, Derek, lounging on the couch, already scrolling through his phone. "Mr. Wilson is here," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. They all froze, looking toward the living room where Jonathan Wilson was sitting, his leather briefcase open on the coffee table. He looked like an intruder in their den, a man of precise, lethal intent. "What is he doing here?" My father asked, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he was about to exert his dominance. "Dad, what is this?" Arthur hadn't moved. He was sitting in his chair, his hands folded in his lap. "Sit down, Richard," he said. "It's time we had a conversation about the future." My mother looked at me, her eyes narrowing as she sensed something shifted, some power dynamic that was no longer in her favor. "Elena, what have you done?" "I haven't done anything, Mom," I said, walking to stand beside Mr. Wilson. "But Grandpa has." The room grew very quiet. My father moved toward Arthur, his face reddening. "Dad, this is ridiculous. We just got back. We're exhausted." "Whatever this is, it can wait." "It has waited long enough," Arthur said. "Jonathan, please." Mr. Wilson stood up, his face an impassive mask. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating the dim living room. "My name is Jonathan Wilson. I am representing George Arthur Harrison. As of December 15, 2024, the total value of Mr. Harrison's estate is $20,180,000. This estate has been finalized and executed in a last will and testament that is legally binding. The silence that followed was total, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. My mother's mouth opened slightly, her coffee cup shaking in her hand. Derek sat up, his phone dropping onto the cushion. "20 million?" my father whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, how? You live on Social Security. You drive a car that's older than Derek." "I live the way I choose to live," Arthur said, his voice calm and cold, "and I have watched how you live." "I have watched you for 30 years, Richard. I have watched you, Patricia. And I have watched you, Derek, and it is my decision that you will not receive a single cent of that $20 million. What? Derek shouted, jumping to his feet. Are you insane? We're your family. Family is a word you use when you want something, Arthur said. You aren't family. You're employees who have forgotten that I'm the one who signs the checks. My father moved toward Arthur, his hand reaching out as if to physically restrain him, but Mr. Wilson stepped in, blocking his path. Mr. Harrison is of sound mind, Wilson said, his voice cutting through the tension. 2 independent physicians have certified this. This is final. My mother started to cry, the sound sharp and grating. Dad, this is just to punish us, right? Because we went to Europe? We'll make it up to you. We'll stay for the whole month of January. I don't want you here, Arthur said. I want to be somewhere where I am valued, not just managed. He looked at me, a brief, fleeting moment of warmth in his eyes, before he turned his gaze back to them. The estate, Mr. Wilson continued, will be distributed as follows. $15,200,000 to Anna Thorne, $3 million to the National Hospice Foundation, $1.8 million to various medical charities, and to Richard, Patricia, and Derek Harrison, 0. Derek lunged, his face a mask of distorted rage, but my father grabbed his arm, pulling him back. My mother was sobbing openly, her face buried in her hands. You can't do this, she shrieked. She's a lawyer. She's always been the one who was too good for us. She manipulated you. She is the only person who cared, Arthur said. And because she is the only person who cared, she is the one who decides whether or not you get a second chance. What does that mean? My father asked, his voice trembling. What chance? Jonathan, Arthur said. Miss Wilson pulled a red folder from his briefcase. There is a conditional bequest. Within 365 days, you may attempt to qualify for a distribution of $500,000 each. The requirements are absolute. 200 hours of volunteer caregiving in a hospice or nursing facility, verified, manual labor, no administrative work, no donations. A 500-word handwritten letter of apology, detailed and specific, describing your harmful behaviors and your plan for change, and 4 sessions of family therapy with Elena. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. And even if you meet all of these conditions, Wilson continued, Elena retains the sole discretion to deny the funds. Her decision is final. There are no appeals. No legal challenges. I stood there, feeling the weight of their collective shock. For years, I had been the one who followed the rules, the one who tried to fix their mistakes, the one who allowed myself to be erased to keep the peace. Now, the rules were mine. You're making her the judge of us? My father asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You're giving our daughter the right to decide if we deserve our own money? I'm giving her the right to hold you accountable, Arthur said. Derek looked at me, his eyes burning with a hatred I had never seen before. You think you've won, don't you? You think this is going to make us love you? This is going to make us hate you. I don't need you to love me, Derek, I said, my voice steady, feeling a surge of strength I had never known I possessed. I've spent 30 years trying to get you to see me now. For the first time, you have no choice. I turned to Mr. Wilson. I have some things I need to discuss with you, alone. I walked toward the door, leaving them standing there in the ruin of their own greed. Behind me, I heard my mother screaming my name, a frantic, desperate sound that I realized, with a shock, meant nothing to me anymore. I stepped out into the cold Connecticut air, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I didn't look back. I had the keys to the rest of my life in my hand, and for the first time, I didn't care what they thought. I drove toward the highway, the city ahead, the future an unwritten contract. I was no longer the girl who waited for permission. I was the one who granted it. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, my eyes bright, my jaw set. I was going to call my firm. I was going to finish that deal, but I wasn't going back to being the person they expected. I was going back as someone who knew exactly what she was worth, and I was going to make sure they learned it too. Mr. Zimbulsus in Stamford was quiet, smelling of polished mahogany, old paper, and expensive leather. It was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I had just left behind at my grandfather's house. He motioned for me to take a seat across his massive executive desk, closing the frosted glass door behind us, to seal out the hum of the city outside. Well, Miss Thorne, Mr. Wilson said, adjusting his tortoise-shell glasses and lacing his fingers together. That certainly went as planned, though I suspect the temperature in that living room is currently hovering somewhere around freezing. They're going to try to break it, I said, leaning back in the leather chair, feeling the steady thrum of adrenaline in my veins. My father is a corporate CFO. He lives and breathes litigation risk and leverage. Even if your initial brief says they have no case, he's going to look for a loophole. Let him look, Mr. Wilson replied, a dry, humorless smile touching his lips. I spent 48 hours with your grandfather drafting this instrument. Every single asset, every single share, every single dollar in that trust is legally insulated. We anticipated their initial panic, their consultations with high-priced probate attorneys, and their eventual realization that they are completely powerless against a competent, fully signed testament from a man who scored 29 out of 30 on a mental competency exam. They will bleed money trying to fight it, and they will find nothing. How much did my grandfather plan this? I asked, looking at the manila folder sitting neatly on his desk. Every word of it, Mr. Wilson said softly. He didn't wake up yesterday and decide to change his will, Ms. Thorne. He started restructuring his assets 3 years ago, right around the time of your father's Napa Valley birthday trip. He watched how you were systematically sidelined, how your professional sacrifices were treated as trivial while your brother's networking opportunities were treated like sacred text. He didn't want to punish them out of spite. He wanted to give you the weapon they've been using against you your entire life, leverage. We spent the next hour going over the administrative details of the trust. For the first time, I wasn't just looking at numbers on a screen, I was looking at independence. $5.2 million in liquid assets, available as soon as probate cleared, with a $10 million long-term trust, managed through Vanguard where I stood as the sole trustee. It was an astonishing sum, but as I walked out of his office into the biting January air, the money felt secondary. What mattered was the blank page in front of me. I drove straight back to Manhattan, my mind sharp and clear. When I walked into the firm, my senior managing partner, David Vance, looked up from his desk with a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. I had missed the final acquisition meetings on December 20th, leaving my team scrambling to close the multi-million-dollar deal without me, and I expected fallout. Elena, David said, standing up as I stepped into his office. Your associates handled the closing admirably, but we missed your signature on the final covenants. Where the hell have you been? Your phone went straight to voicemail for 2 days over Christmas. I didn't offer a convoluted excuse about a family emergency or a sick relative. I looked him dead in the eye, my posture unyielding. David, my family attempted to hijack my personal life for a holiday convenience, as they have done for years. I handled it, and I am here now to finalize the acquisition and secure my position on the partnership track. David stared at me for a long, calculating second. Then, a slow, appreciative grin spread across his face. You look different, Elena. There's a steel in you today that wasn't there last week. I'm done apologizing for being good at my job, I said quietly. Good, David replied, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany desk, because the client wants you to lead the Q1 expansion strategy. Welcome back. For the next month, I threw myself into my work with a ruthless, unshakable focus. But while my professional life soared, my family's life began to disintegrate under the weight of their own making. I didn't have to look for news. It trickled in through my Aunt Susan, who took it upon herself to keep me updated on the wreckage. On January 3rd, my father had panicked and dragged my mother and brother to 3 different elite law firms in Connecticut and Manhattan, dropping over $2,000 in consultation fees just to hear every single corporate and probate lawyer tell him the exact same thing. Mr. Harrison is of sound mind, the will is airtight, and you have zero legal standing to contest it. By January 6th, my father had sent a frantic, rambling email to the extended family, which Susan dutifully forwarded to me. In it, he laid out the grim reality. The lawyers say we can't fight the will legally, but Stella is still our daughter and sister. She'll forgive us if we approach this right. We need to complete the 200 volunteer hours, write the letters, and do the therapy. Then we'll get $500,000 each. It's better than nothing. Meeting Sunday, 6 p.m. Don't tell Stella. I read the email while sitting in my sleek Upper West Side apartment, sipping a cup of black coffee, watching the snow fall over Central Park. They didn't see the irony. Even in defeat, they were treating a relationship like a transaction, plotting a strategy to maximize their payout. I forwarded the email to Mr. Wilson with a single line. FYI, noted. By February 1st, the absurdity of their redemption arc officially commenced. I found out through a colleague at the Riverside Healthcare Network, where I occasionally volunteered on weekends. She walked up to my desk with a cup of coffee, shaking her head. "Hey, Elena, you'll never guess who just signed up for our volunteer program. Your brother, Derek." "Derek?" I raised an eyebrow. "Corporate defense attorney Derek? Who thinks manual labor is beneath him?" "The very same," my colleague laughed. "He's scheduled for 4 hours every Saturday morning. Look, I'm not supposed to say much, but he looks miserable. He spent his entire shift last Saturday complaining to an orderly about how the Wi-Fi in the break room is too slow. I checked the public logs out of morbid curiosity. Derek logged his first shift on February 1st, rigidly sticking to the 4-hour minimum from 9 to 1. My mother signed up at a hospice 18 miles away, logging her hours with bitter reluctance, while my father chose a senior care facility 22 miles out, desperately trying to finagle administrative desk jobs to avoid interacting directly with residents. They were putting in the time because they wanted their $500,000, but every single facility evaluation painted a picture of absolute seething resentment. Mr. Wilson had arranged for the supervisors to send confidential reports directly to me, and reading them was like watching 3 spoiled children forced to eat vegetables. Derek's evaluation from Riverside Nursing Home read, "Mr. Harrison is competent in basic tasks, but demonstrates visible resentment. On March 3rd, he informed a patient's family member that he was only here because he had to be, causing visible distress to the family. He frequently attempts to cut his shifts short." My mother's evaluation from the Hartford Hospice Center noted, "Mrs. Harrison completes minimum required tasks but shows little connection with residents. She frequently inquires how much longer until her 200 hours are fulfilled. She arrives late approximately 40% of the time." My father's evaluation from New Haven Senior Care was the most telling. Mr. Harrison actively avoids tasks involving personal care. He demands reassignment to administrative paperwork, which we deny per the will's explicit instructions. Several staff members have noted his visible physical discomfort around aging individuals. Months bled into one another. Spring rolled into summer, and the seasons turned without a single direct word passing between my parents and me. They tried texting and calling during the first few weeks, frantic apologies, passive-aggressive guilt trips, and outright demands, until I blocked their numbers entirely. My mother even tried posting an old childhood photo of me on Instagram with the caption, "Missing my baby girl." Family is forever, keeping comments disabled to prevent anyone from asking uncomfortable questions. But the digital walls they had built around themselves were collapsing. Their friends knew about the trip to Europe that had mysteriously vanished from their feeds. The extended family knew about the broken will. They were living in a ghost town of their own design. June 15, 2025. The deadline for the volunteer hours had passed, and the apology letters arrived at Mr. Wilson's office. I drove down to Stamford on a warm Tuesday afternoon to pick them up. Mr. Wilson handed me a manila folder containing 3 thick envelopes, each containing a handwritten letter. I took them to a quiet coffee shop down the street, sitting by the window as the afternoon sun beat down on the pavement. I opened Derek's letter first, 523 words, written in his sharp, jagged legal cursive. "Dear Stella, I am writing to apologize for my past actions. I realize now that I may have hurt your feelings by not including you in family activities. I was focused on my career and did not think about how my choices affected you. I am sorry if you felt excluded. I hope we can move forward as a family. I have learned a lot from volunteering, and I understand now that caregiving is important work." It was a corporate press release disguised as an apology. The phrase "I'm sorry if you felt excluded" jumped off the page. The classic non-apology of someone who believes the problem is your perception, not their behavior. My mother's letter was 612 words of emotional manipulation. My dear Stella, a mother's love is forever, and I want you to know I have always loved you. I am sorry that my actions made you feel less important than Derek. That was never my intention. I was trying to help Derek succeed, and sometimes I made choices that hurt you. I regret that. I have been volunteering at the hospice, and I see now how hard your job is. You are a wonderful nurse. She still couldn't remember. I was a corporate attorney, defaulting to the image of me she had spent a decade ignoring, and I am proud of you. I hope you can forgive me and we can be a family again. She spent 400 words explaining why she favored Derek and the final 100 demanding forgiveness before she had even accepted responsibility. Then came my father's letter. 504 words. Stella, I am writing this letter because the will requires it, but I want you to know my feelings are sincere. I am sorry for the times I did not appreciate your career choice. I now understand that hard work is valuable no matter what form it takes. I am also sorry for not asking you to join us on family trips. I thought you were busy with work and preferred to stay home. I was wrong, I should have asked. I have completed 201 hours of volunteering as required. I hope this demonstrates my commitment to change. He admitted right in the opening line that he was only writing because a dead man's contract forced him to. He blamed his neglect on a convenient lie. I thought you preferred to stay home, rewriting history to mask his utter indifference. I closed the folder, my chest feeling tight, but not with sadness, with absolute clarity. They had met the technical requirements. They had done the time, but they hadn't changed. They were still the exact same people who had left me behind in an empty house while they flew to Paris. When I texted Mr. Wilson to ask if I could force a rewrite, his response was pragmatic. Technically, they fulfilled the condition. The will says write a letter, not write a letter Stella approves of. But your final decision is yours regardless. The final hurdle of their probation arrived between July and October, 4 mandatory family therapy sessions facilitated by Dr. Emma Reeves, a licensed marriage and family therapist with nearly 2 decades of experience. I attended all 4 sessions, sitting across from them in Dr. Reeves' sterile, quiet office in Manhattan. They were disasters from start to finish. In the first session, my mother wept theatrical tears and claimed she never meant to hurt anyone. In the second, Derek openly accused me of weaponizing our grandfather's estate, out of spite. In the third, my father leaned forward and asked Dr. Reeves, with a straight face, "Don't you think $15 million is a bit excessive for a 30-year-old girl anyway?" And in the fourth session, held on October 8th, my mother dropped all pretense entirely. She looked right at me across the coffee table and asked point-blank, "All right, the therapy is done, the hours are logged, the letters are sent, so you'll give us the money now, right?" Dr. Reeves didn't say a word, letting the heavy, suffocating silence hang in the room. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw the hollow greed beneath the designer clothes and the expensive skincare. A week later, Dr. Reeves sent me her final confidential assessment. The concluding line summarized everything. In my professional opinion, the family's participation in these sessions has been motivated entirely by financial gain rather than any authentic desire for emotional reconciliation or self-reflection. I filed the report away alongside the volunteer evaluations and the apology letters. I had my answer. I had all the data I needed. All that remained was waiting for the clock to run out. By December, the 1-year anniversary of the will reading was rapidly approaching. I had spent the year building a life that was entirely my own. I had moved out of my old routine, bought a stunning 2-bedroom condo in downtown Greenwich for cash. No mortgage, no debt, complete structural freedom, and I had even begun dating someone who saw me for who I actually was. His name was David Chen, an intensive care unit nurse I had met in April when one of my corporate pro bono healthcare clients was transferred for stabilization. He was grounded, sharp, incredibly kind, and when I finally told him about my family and the $20 million estate after 3 months of dating, he had simply smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Okay, but we're still splitting the bill when we get ramen." He didn't care about the money. He cared about me. It was a foreign concept, and it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in my life. On January 2nd, 2026, exactly 1 year to the day after the initial reading, I walked back into Mr. Wilson's conference room in Stamford. The atmosphere in the room was entirely different from the year before. My father wore a sharp charcoal suit, my mother wore a tailored navy dress. Derek was dressed in crisp slacks. They looked older, worn down by a year of grueling volunteer shifts, legal dead ends, and agonizing suspense. As I walked in and took my seat beside Mr. Wilson, they looked at me with a mix of desperate hope and thinly veiled terror. They thought they had passed the test. They thought they had crossed the finish line. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat, opening a clean, leather folder. As stipulated in Article 5 of the late Mr. George Arthur Harrison's last will and testament, he announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. The 1-year observation period concluded at midnight. Ms. Thorne has reviewed all the submitted compliance documentation, including the facility volunteer logs, the apology letters, and the clinical therapy assessments provided by Dr. Emma Reeves. She is now prepared to deliver her final decision. My father leaned forward, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Well?" he demanded, his voice tight. "We fulfilled every single requirement, every hour, every letter, every session. The conditions are met." I didn't speak. I simply slid a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper across the polished wood toward him. My father picked it up. His eyes scanned the typewritten words, moving from the heading down to the bottom line. As he read it, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking chalky and gray. He lowered the paper slowly, his hands trembling. My mother snatched it out of his hand. Her eyes darted across the page, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her throat. Allocation decision. Richard Harrison, $0 Patricia Harrison, $0 Derek Harrison, $0 reason. While all three individuals technically fulfilled the baseline physical requirements of the conditional bequest, comprehensive evaluations, correspondence, and clinical observations confirm an absolute absence of genuine remorse, personal growth, or a desire for authentic relationship repair. Compliance was executed strictly as a transactional mechanism for financial acquisition. "No," my mother whispered, shaking her head rapidly as tears sprang to her eyes. "No, this is a mistake. We did everything. We spent a year wiping down tables in nursing homes. We wrote those letters. We sat in that room with that therapist. You can't just take our $500,000 after all of that." "You didn't do it to fix the relationship, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the room with absolute, unshakable calm. "You did it because you thought if you punched enough clock hours, you could buy your way back into the will. You did 200 hours, because that was the minimum required. You wrote 500 words because that was the minimum required. You sat in therapy and complained about how much I was getting instead of listening to why I was hurt." Derek slammed his fist down onto the table, the sound cracking like a pistol shot. "This is insane. We jumped through every hoop you set up. You played us. You strung us along for a whole year just to humiliate us." "I didn't string you along, Derek," I said, looking right at him. "Grandpa gave you a choice. He gave you an open door to prove that you cared about me more than my bank account. And every single day for 365 days, you proved him right. You proved that you only care about what I can give you." My father stood up slowly, his face flushed a dark, angry crimson, the veins in his neck bulging. "For 30 years I provided for you," he roared, his voice shaking with furious indignation. "I paid for your Ivy League education, I gave you a roof over your head, I raised you. And you sit there and treat us like strangers over a bitter old man's manipulated fortune." "You provided for me financially because it was your legal obligation," I replied, standing up to match his height, feeling not an ounce of fear, only a cold, crystalline power. "But you never saw me. You never asked about my life, my career, or my happiness, unless you needed something. Unless you needed someone to stay behind while you went to Paris. Unless you needed someone to watch the house while you lived your lives. For 10 years, you gave me the absolute minimum amount of respect and love you could muster without feeling guilty. So today, I am giving you exactly what you gave me." I picked up my briefcase, securing the clasp with a sharp click. "Nothing," I said softly. My mother broke down completely, sobbing openly into her hands, while my father stood frozen, paralyzed by the realization that his leverage, his authority, and his manipulation had finally hit a brick wall that no amount of corporate aggression could break. "You're making a huge mistake," Derek hissed, his face twisted with venom as I turned toward the door. "You're going to die alone with your $15 million, and nobody is going to give a damn about you." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the three of them, shrummed, furious, trapped in the wreckage of their own greed. "No, Derek," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not alone at all. I finally have a family. I just had to fire my old one to find them." I walked out of the conference room, closing the heavy glass door behind me. I didn't look back. The heavy oak and frosted glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing in the sound of my mother's ragged sobbing and the tight, suffocating tension of a family dynasty that had finally collapsed under its own weight. I stood in the corridor of Mr. Wilson's law office for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the building's climate control system. The air smelled of clean carpet, fresh paper, and the distinct, crisp scent of finality. My heart was beating steadily, no longer spiked with the frantic adrenaline of confrontation, but locked into a deep, rhythmic calm. Mr. Wilson stepped out of the conference room a few moments later, his briefcase in hand, his charcoal suit immaculate. He looked at me with a quiet, professional respect that felt entirely earned. "Well handled, Ms. Thorne," he said softly, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the elevators. "In 32 years of probate and estate law, I have mediated thousands of inheritance disputes. Most of them end in screaming matches, protracted court battles, and mutual destruction. Very few end with someone actually walking away with their dignity fully intact." "They expected a negotiation, Mr. Wilson," I said, watching the digital floor numbers tick downward above the elevator doors. "They thought the conditional bequest was a hurdle they could clear by logging hours and checking boxes, like an executive compliance audit. They never understood that integrity isn't something you can outsource or cram for at the last minute. Your grandfather knew precisely what he was doing when he named you sole trustee," Mr. Wilson replied, pressing the button for the lobby. "He wasn't trying to build a fortress of money, he was building a mirror, and they simply couldn't bear to look into it." When the elevator arrived, we parted ways in the lobby. He headed back toward his administrative offices, and I stepped out onto the sunlit streets of Stamford. It was a crisp January afternoon, the sky a vast unbroken sheet of winter blue. The snow from the morning had melted into slush along the curbs, but the air was clean and sharp. I unlocked my car, a sleek, understated sedan I had purchased 6 months prior without asking anyone's permission, and tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat. I didn't drive back to Manhattan immediately. Instead, I pointed the car north, taking the winding 2-lane roads toward my grandfather's house in Connecticut. The drive took just under 20 minutes. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the crunch of the tires sounded identical to the morning I had arrived a year ago, fleeing a Manhattan office and a life dictated by other people's expectations. But everything else had shifted. The house looked smaller now, less imposing, reduced to its actual dimensions. A sturdy, comfortable old home built by a man who valued substance over display. I parked next to my grandfather's beat-up 2004 Toyota Camry, a vehicle with nearly 200,000 miles on it that he stubbornly refused to replace, despite having a fortune sitting quietly in indexed funds. When I opened the front door, the familiar scent of old wood, lemon oil, and faint fireplace ash washed over me. I didn't need to call out. I walked straight into the living room, and there he was, sitting in his maple wood rocking chair by the hearth, a cup of coffee resting on the side table, his bifocals perched on his nose as he scanned the daily newspaper. He didn't look 82. Despite the quiet fragility that comes with advanced age, his presence remained entirely unshakable, anchored by the same sharp, observant clarity that had seen through a lifetime of familial pretense. He lowered the newspaper as I stepped into his field of vision, folding it neatly across his lap. A faint, knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Well?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. "Is it finished?" I walked over, pulled up a small wooden footstool and sat down right beside his chair, resting my hands on his knee just as I used to do when I was a little girl before the world taught me how to shrink myself. "It's finished," I said, a quiet breath escaping my lips. The decision was delivered. They received 0. Grandpa Arthur didn't look shocked, nor did he look triumphant. He simply nodded, a gesture of profound, settling relief. "And how did they take it?" "Just like you knew they would," I replied, staring into the flickering embers of the fire. "Mom cried because she thought she had earned it by doing time in a nursing home. Dad raged because he couldn't litigate away the fact that he was measured and found wanting. And Derek threatened that I would die alone with my money." Arthur let out a dry, quiet chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Derek has always had a remarkable talent for missing the entire point of an argument. He thinks life is a balance sheet where you can offset bad character with professional titles. He spent his whole life trying to win a race where he was the only one running against an imaginary opponent." He reached out, his weathered, steady hand resting gently on top of mine. His skin was warm, his grip carrying that familiar, quiet strength. "Are you troubled by what he said, Elena?" he asked softly, searching my eyes. "About being alone?" "Not even a little bit, Grandpa," I said, looking up at him with absolute certainty. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not lonely. For years I sat at family dinners surrounded by people who shared my blood, and I felt like a ghost, completely invisible, existing only to serve their convenience. But this past year, I built a life where I am actually seen. I have a career I love, a home that is truly mine, and people in my corner who care about who I am, not what I can write on a check for them." "Good," Arthur murmured, squeezing my hand. "That was the entire point of the exercise. Money is just an instrument, Elena. It can buy you comfort, it can buy you security, and it can buy you time, but it cannot buy you self-respect. That is something you have to forge out of the fire yourself, and you forged it." We sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling softly, casting warm, dancing shadows across the wooden floorboards. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with words or forced conversation, a shared stillness between two people who understood what it meant to carry the weight of a demanding world. Later that evening, I walked out to my car to retrieve a manila folder I had brought from my office. When I returned to the living room, I laid it out on the coffee table in front of him. "What is this?" Arthur asked, peering down at the contents. "Progress reports," I said with a smile. "Not from my family. From the Stella Harrison Caregiver Excellence Fund." Arthur's eyes lit up behind his bifocals as he opened the folder, revealing the second annual report and a fresh stack of letters from scholarship recipients. Established through the $3 million he had designated to the National Hospice Foundation, the fund had spent the past year quietly transforming the lives of individuals dedicated to end-of-life care, single mothers switching careers, former emergency medical technicians specializing in palliative support, and young nurses stepping bravely into a field the rest of the world preferred to look away from. He picked up a handwritten letter from a young nursing student named Maria Lopez, reading it slowly under the warm glow of the floor lamp. When he finished, he folded it carefully and set it back on the table, his expression luminous. "Your name is attached to something that matters, Elena," he said, his voice thick with a rare quiet emotion. "Long after I am gone, long after this house is sold and these floors stop creaking, there will be nurses walking hospital wards and hospice rooms carrying your name like a badge of honor. They will be easing pain because you gave them the space to do so." "We did it together, Grandpa," I corrected him gently. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I merely provided the foundation, you provided the soul." The following months passed with a steady, unhurried grace that felt entirely foreign to my old life in Manhattan. My professional trajectory at the firm reached its absolute peak when David Vance officially pushed my name through to the Executive Committee for Full Equity Partnership, a milestone achieved 3 years ahead of any lawyer in the firm's history. I didn't celebrate with superficial networking parties or forced corporate dinners. Instead, David took our core team out for a quiet dinner at an upscale bistro in Tribeca, and when the bill arrived, I calmly pulled out my card and paid the entire balance without blinking, smiling as David raised a glass of Cabernet in a silent toast to my unyielding independence. My relationship with David Chen deepened into something solid and unshakable. We spent our weekends walking through Central Park, cooking dinners in my Greenwich condo, and talking about our respective patients and clients with a mutual, profound respect for the emotional weight of our work. He never treated my wealth as a status symbol, and I never treated his demanding nursing shifts as secondary to my legal career. We were partners in the truest sense of the word, two individuals standing side by side, choosing each other every single day without an ounce of obligation or leverage between us. As for my biological family, the silence remained absolute. I heard occasional echoes through my Aunt Susan, who had officially severed ties with my immediate household and sent me regular, cheerful updates about her own life. My father had doubled down on his corporate duties, throwing himself into regional insurance projections to mask the public embarrassment of a lost inheritance and a failed legal challenge. My mother had retreated into a tight circle of country club acquaintances, quietly scrubbing her social media presence of any trace of the family's former golden boy narrative, and Derek had packed his bags and moved to a corporate law firm in Boston, seeking distance from a city where his legal bluster had been thoroughly dismantled by a dead man's foresight and a daughter's quiet resolve. They didn't reach out. I didn't reach out. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to explain, and no lingering debt to pay. The contract had been fulfilled to the letter, and the ledger was closed forever. By the summer of 2026, exactly 18 months after the will reading, I found myself driving down to Connecticut on a warm Sunday afternoon, following the familiar, sun-dappled route to my grandfather's house. The air was thick with the scent of blooming summer hydrangeas and cut grass. The maple trees in the front yard were a dense, vibrant canopy of emerald green, rustling lazily in the July breeze. I pulled my car into the driveway, stepping out into the golden afternoon light, carrying a fresh bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his absolute favorite. I pushed open the front door without knocking, calling out softly into the foyer, "Grandpa, it's me." There was no immediate answer from the living room. I walked down the short hallway, expecting to find him in his usual spot by the fireplace. But the rocking chair was empty. A sudden cold flutter of unease rippled through my chest. I set the flowers down on the side table and walked quickly toward his study, finding the door propped wide open. Arthur was sitting at his old wooden desk, the same desk where he used to manage his rental properties back in the 70s. The same desk where he had drafted the quiet blueprint of my freedom. He wasn't reading the newspaper. He was holding a small, worn leather journal in his lap, staring out the window at the garden with a look of profound, tranquil contentment. I stopped in the doorway, letting out a quiet breath of relief. "Grandpa, you scared me for a second. Are you okay?" He turned his head slowly, his bright blue eyes catching the afternoon light, clear and warm. He smiled, a wide, unhurried smile that reached all the way to the crinkles around his eyes. "I'm better than okay, Elena," he said, his voice steady, though softer than it used to be. "I was just sitting here thinking about you." I walked across the room, pulling up a chair right beside him and taking his hand. "Thinking about me? Did I do something wrong?" "Never," he said, squeezing my fingers with that familiar grounding pressure. "I was just thinking about the day you walked into this house in December of 24, looking like a soldier who had just retreated from a losing battle on a foreign front. You were carrying the weight of 1,000 invisible expectations, apologizing for existing, letting everyone else write the script of your life." He reached out with his free hand, gently touching my cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray lock of hair. "Look at you now," he whispered, pride shining in his eyes. "You didn't just win a legal battle, Elena. You won your own life back. You took the worst thing they ever did to you, their coldness, their indifference, their absolute failure to see your worth, and you turned it into the foundation of your absolute independence. I only had the courage to do it because you showed me it was possible. I said, my voice thick with emotion as my eyes welled with tears that weren't sad, but overflowing with a deep, cleansing gratitude. You were the only one who ever looked past the surface and realized I was drowning. I didn't save you, Elena, Arthur said softly, his gaze locking onto mine with fierce, unyielding love. I just handed you the key to the door that you were already strong enough to open. The choice to walk through it, that was all you. We sat there together in the quiet study as the golden afternoon sun slowly began to dip below the horizon, casting long, warm amber streaks across the floorboards. Outside, a lone bird sang its evening song in the heavy branches of the maple tree, and in the distance, the faint, steady hum of the world kept turning. I didn't think about my parents. I didn't think about Derek, or the millions of dollars sitting in trust, or the corporate towers of Manhattan waiting for me on Monday morning. In that exact moment, none of those things mattered. I was 30 years old. I was a partner, a daughter of my own making, a woman who had looked into the mirror of her family's conditional love and chosen to walk away into the wide, unbroken expanse of her own freedom. I had spent the first 3 decades of my life waiting for permission to exist, waiting for someone to finally look at me and say I mattered. And now, sitting in the quiet house with the grandfather who had loved me enough to let me save myself, I realized I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. I had the pen. And the rest of the story was entirely mine to write.